Hello, Toastmasters. I am going to tell you a fantastic story, but we're going to go back not 1,200 years, but for now, just about 30 years. About 30 years ago, I worked at a radio station, KBPS, in Portland, Oregon, and it was here where I heard for the first time the Immigrant song by Led Zeppelin. I love this song, not because half of the lyrics are incoherent to me, but because I really like just some of the musical aspects of the song. There's this great guitar riff, Robert Plant's vocals, and Plant has this haunting cry in the song that just somehow touches my soul. Now, I might have lots of approbation for the song, but it is that you really have to understand what the song is about. And so I looked it up because the lyrics were kind of incoherent to me. I decided I would go ahead and look up what is the Immigrant song all about. Well, Robert Plant, wrote the song because the band was traveling from Iceland to England after a tour in Iceland. They're going back to their home country of England. So on the surface, when they sing about going to that Western shore in the song, that's kind of what they're talking about. But there's a lot more to it than that. There's references to Norse mythology and the Viking invasions in England and the rest of Europe. So I wanted to unpack all of this for you then. There's a lot to this whole Viking invasion thing. I want you to first imagine the British Isles as we know it today, but go back in time 1,200 years. When we go back in time 1,200 years, we have various bands of people across this Anglo-Saxon region. And these bands of people are speaking different languages, sometimes different dialects. There are kingdoms, but they are disparate kingdoms. And those kingdoms have armies, and sometimes those armies fight, sometimes they don't. They're not the best armies in the world. And then come in the Vikings and their big long ships that we see, these iconic long ships come in. And the Vikings come in to plunder. Now, why they plunder, that's up for debate. But the point is, they come in, they ransack villages, they steal stuff, they steal the women, they do all sorts of bad stuff. Really rough times in these medieval times. The Vikings started this all about 1,200 years ago. So maybe in the late 8th century was when we first started seeing recordings of Vikings attacking England. Now, first, they would attack monasteries and churches. Monasteries because the monks wanted to be remote, isolated, and so therefore they weren't very well protected. Churches, on the other hand, might have been a little bit more well protected, but they had valuables that the Vikings could walk off with. So those were easy targets for the Vikings at the beginning. But what the first recorded incident of a Viking invasion happened in 789. In 789, this is just off the coast of the Isle of Portland. By the way, no relation to my hometown of Portland, Oregon. Off the coast of the Isle of Portland, the locals saw 3 longships coming in. And they're like, oh, hey, how about that? Must be merchant ships. So the local custom is to call out the royal official called the Royal Reeve to go greet the merchant ships. So the Royal Reeve comes over and that's his job. He greets the merchant ships and then kind of looks around and says, hey, what do you got in here? You got anything that maybe we could tax? Or take something back to the king, a little something for the king. Well, what do you suppose the Vikings did to the tax collector? They killed him. Thus, the first incident of a Viking invasion in Anglo-Saxon. They killed this guy, and bad stuff happened from there on out. Over the course of the next 100 years or so, we had many battles. The Vikings overran the Anglo-Saxon area pretty well over the course of the 100 years, but it wasn't without a good fight by the Anglo-Saxons. Like I said, there were many kingdoms at that time. One of those kings was King Aella of Northumbria. And there was this battle between Aella and this Viking chief, Ragnar Lombrock. They fought, and the Viking chief Ragnar lost. So what did Ayla do to Ragnar when he captured him? He put him to death by a pit of snakes. Apparently, that was a thing, to die by a pit of snakes. Well, this enraged Ragnar's sons. So Ragnar's sons got together, got a bunch of people together, and they put this great heathen army. I'm guessing that's not a name they gave themselves, but that's neither here nor there. This great heathen army then invaded Anglo-Saxon and caught up with Ayla. Now, by one account, Ayla was defeated, but by one account, Ayla was killed on the battlefield. But by Viking legend, they captured him and put him to death by way of blood eagle. And if you don't know what blood eagle is, that's where you get lied down on your stomach, and they cut holes in your back, cut through the ribs, and then they stuff your lungs or stick your lungs out those incisions, so you kind of look like an eagle. Doesn't sound very pleasant, but I suppose that's the point. Over the course of, say, 250 years or so, the Vikings had invaded. And by about the 11th century, the Viking era was starting to wind down. In 1066, there was kind of a final big battle. The Norwegian king, Harald Hardrada, lost and was killed in battle at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. And that, to many, is the end of the Viking era. And to some, for sure, the end of the Viking era in England, but the greater Viking era as a whole kind of ended right about that time. Because also politically, the Scandinavian countries were moving more toward a royalty system. And a lot of these people were converting from the old Norse polytheistic religion to Christianity. So a lot of things happening, and the Viking era was kind of coming to a close at that point. Lots of plundering, lots of conquering, and bloodshed was occurring. Before I leave you, I want to share with you the last stanza of the song, the Immigrant song, because even though there's lots of fighting, sometimes you win and sometimes you lose, at the end, it makes you stronger. So now you'd better stop and rebuild all your ruins, for peace and trust can win the day despite all your losing. Mr. Toastmaster.
Yeah, thank you, Dan.